It once seemed to me that keeping a secret was a way to shield the people I loved from pain, but that assumption was entirely flawed. In reality, the toll of that silence was paid solely by my own spirit. To the rest of our community, I appeared completely unaltered as I stepped toward my meeting with the bishop. I maintained the expected cheerful disposition following our Sunday gatherings, continued my usual routine of assisting Mother with the weekend baking, and joined in the shared merriment during our evening quilting circles. Beneath that familiar exterior, however, a vital piece of my soul had vanished. I lacked the vocabulary to describe this internal void initially, recognizing only that the reflection looking back at me each dawn belonged to a complete stranger. The particular Sabbath morning that I chose to break my silence commenced without any outward sign of the shift taking place within me. Upon entering the kitchen, I found Mother already deeply occupied with the morning's dough. Father had long since departed for his early chores in the barn, while the familiar bickering of my little brothers over their duties at the water well echoed through the house. Ordinarily, their playful disputes brought joy to my heart, but on this occasion, their words felt strangely distant. Pausing to wipe the flour from her fingers, Mother cast a discerning look in my direction and noted my apparent lack of rest. I offered a brief admission of my sleeplessness, prompting her to examine my expression more closely, as she observed that some heavy burden seemed to be weighing on me. Though I attempted to dismiss her concern with a strained grin and a claim of simple exhaustion, her subtle skepticism was obvious. It requires no verbal explanation for a mother to detect the quiet anguish residing within her child. Our journey to the meeting house by horse and carriage proceeded in near silence, unfolding along a path bordered by crops gathering their early autumn gold. We encountered numerous neighbors along the way, each household offering warm grins and familiar gestures of greeting. My own responses were born purely of social obligation rather than genuine warmth. The moment we pulled into the church grounds, Rebecca rushed to my side before I could even step down from the carriage, mentioning how much she had wished to see me over the past several days, and expressing regret over my absence from the recent quilting gathering. I claimed a sudden indisposition as my excuse, earning a concerned look from her as she noted this was my second absence in recent weeks. Assuring her of my recovery was merely another fabrication. Having been my companion since early childhood, she searched my gaze with unusual intensity and softly suggested that she was always available to listen. The incomplete sentence conveyed everything necessary, and after offering my gratitude, I moved toward the congregation. Rather than offering solace, the subsequent service only highlighted the distance that had grown between my soul and my faith, as the sacred songs regarding truthfulness, absolution, and divine grace felt entirely inapplicable to a person harboring hidden deception. Following the benediction, the congregation assembled on the grounds for our shared midday meal, surrounded by the laughter of youth playing in the yard, senior men conversing about the seasonal crop yields, and women unpacking freshly baked loaves and fruit desserts. Despite the serene tableau enveloping me, an overwhelming sense of isolation took hold, revealing a profound reality that true alienation does not require physical solitude. It stems from the conviction that exposing your genuine self would leave you entirely uncomprehended by those around you. Nearby, underneath the branches of a mature maple tree, the bishop was engaged in conversation with a pair of church elders when his gaze drifted toward my isolated figure. Our brief visual contact was enough to prompt him to excuse himself and approach me, quietly inquiring if I wished to converse. I gave an affirmative gesture, and without demanding an explanation, he guided me through a modest entrance adjacent to the main building. The interior was utterly austere, containing nothing beyond a basic table, a pair of chairs, and scripture positioned by the window frame, a lack of ornamentation that uniquely stripped away any pretense of concealment. For a prolonged moment, we remained seated opposite one another in absolute silence until he gently inquired about the purpose of my visit. The explanations I had meticulously rehearsed over the preceding days dissolved instantly from my thoughts, and before I could stop them, silent tears began to track down my face as I managed to convey only that I was profoundly weary. When he prompted me to clarify the source of this exhaustion, I confessed that the burden of maintaining a false facade had become too much to bear. The space grew quiet once more as his hand brushed against the sacred text, though he chose not to open it, remarking instead that genuine honesty requires no polished speech, only a sincere spirit. Nodding in agreement, I explained that while my daily habit of morning prayer persisted, the communication now felt hollow, as if the words could never ascend past the roof of our home. He questioned the root of this barrier, allowing me to recognize that I was continuously petitioning the Almighty to remove a burden while simultaneously avoiding the core issue. As he inclined toward me to ask what specific reality I was avoiding, my gaze fell to my lap where I admitted the existence of my own deception. His expression remained unalarmed as he noted that while falsehoods are a common human failing, certain untruths fundamentally alter the fabric of who we are. I explained that my initial deception had multiplied exponentially, weaving a web where each subsequent falsehood served merely to shield the previous one, under the misguided notion of safeguarding others. He acknowledged this common pattern with a slow nod, prompting me to admit through my tears that the original motivation for the secrecy had blurred into obscurity, leaving behind only an all-consuming dread. With great gentleness, he observed that succumbing to terror exacts a heavy toll, specifically demanding our inner tranquility as payment. This profound insight resonated deeply within me, forcing the realization that my loss of serenity was not inflicted by outside forces, but was a deliberate transaction I had made through a succession of minor fabrications, leaving me to whisper my utter ignorance of how to reclaim my true identity. Following a brief period of reflection, the church leader posed an unanticipated inquiry regarding the exact moment I concluded that reality was too perilous to expose. The question struck me with immense clarity, bypassing recent weeks and months to pinpoint a specific afternoon near the historic covered bridge, a moment where a single choice redirected the course of my life, as I erroneously believed a minor deception would resolve the dilemma. Instead, that choice set in motion a transformation into an identity I had never wished to assume. As his question hovered in the stillness of the room, I recognized that the memory of that day had never left my thoughts, prompting me to reveal that the incident occurred roughly 90 days prior, just on the eve of the autumn reaping. With his hands clasped attentively, he listened as I recalled how a standard Friday morning had unfolded with the early completion of my household duties, leading Mother to request that I transport freshly baked loaves and some fruit preserves to my grandmother's residence. The journey required less than an hour and was a route I had traversed countless times without incident. There was no indication of trouble as Father prepared the horse and carriage, and Mother placed an additional loaf into my bundle, offering a parting reminder to return before evening to assist with the remaining chores. My absolute assurance of a prompt return was given in total sincerity, with no inkling that keeping such a vow would soon prove entirely out of my reach. The path toward my grandmother's farm led through expansive pastures before funneling through the timbered expanse of a covered bridge. Nearing the structure, I observed a modest gathering clustered at the threshold, where a horse had lost its footing due to a cast shoe, causing the attached vehicle to tilt precariously. A pair of community men were working diligently to pacify the distressed beast, while an elderly woman comforted a weeping toddler close by. Acting on impulse, I guided my own horse to the roadside and extended an offer of assistance. One of the men expressed gratitude, suggesting that tending to the upset child would be of immense help. Stepping down from my seat, I lowered myself to the young boy's level, noting his tear-stained face and tender age of roughly 5 years, and offered soothing words to assure him of the animal's safety. He tentatively clasped my fingers as the men successfully stabilized the horse and secured the shoe, drawing heartfelt appreciation from the older woman. I dismissed the effort as a minor gesture, though she countered with a warm expression, noting that acts of goodwill carry significant weight. Resuming my trip, a sense of fulfillment accompanied me, completely oblivious to the fact that the true complication of that day lay ahead. Upon my arrival, Grandmother would not hear of me leaving without sharing a meal of broth and warm biscuits, and our conversation extended far beyond my initial schedule. When I finally departed for the return trip, the sun was already descending toward the tree line, prompting me to quicken our pace out of respect for Father's strict aversion to unpunctuality. Approaching the homestead, his silhouette was clearly visible near the barnyard, and even from afar, his posture signaled an anxious vigil. He greeted my arrival not with anger, but with palpable relief, admitting his growing concern, which led me to offer an immediate apology, explaining the delay caused by the stranded travelers at the bridge. He acknowledged the event, having already received word of it, but followed up with an inquiry regarding the remaining hours of the afternoon. A wave of anxiety washed over me because the roadside assistance had occupied only a brief interval, and the true cause of my delay was entirely benign, simply honoring my grandmother's wish for company. There was no malice or wrongdoing in my choice, yet an irrational fear seized me, driven perhaps by a desire to avoid appearing negligent or disrespectful of Mother's timeline, causing me to offer a falsified smile and claim that a malfunctioning carriage wheel had impeded my progress. The fluid ease with which the untruth surfaced left me deeply unsettled. Father instantly moved toward the vehicle to inspect the damage, asking which side had failed, to which I nervously specified the rear wheel. I watched in dread as he crouched to scrutinize the mechanism, which remained flawlessly intact, creating a momentary panic that my deception had been exposed. Upon standing, he reasoned that a component must have temporarily shifted, an explanation I quickly endorsed. His warm relief at my safe return underscored the missed opportunity to rectify the mistake right then, with a simple admission of my dishonesty. Instead, I chose silence, allowing the deception to solidify when Father recounted the fictional mechanical trouble to Mother during evening prayers and supper before I could explain myself. When Mother anxiously inquired if the ordeal had caused me distress, I looked upon my parents and offered an affirmative nod, sinking deeper into a pattern of falsehood that required less effort than the first. Maintaining a respectful silence throughout my narration, the bishop eventually noted that my initial departure from the truth was not intended to evade discipline, but rather to sustain the illusion itself. Keeping my eyes fixed on the floorboards, I concurred with his assessment, prompting him to observe that deception typically expands not from malice, but from a foundation of vulnerability and dread. As my sorrow renewed, I explained how I had rationalized the behavior as inconsequential, telling myself such minor infractions were universal, yet the memory persisted through every subsequent morning devotion and worship service. I recounted an instance a week afterward when Father, while assisting a neighbor with a similar mechanical issue, light-heartedly expressed gratitude that my own carriage had spared me severe accident. Joining in his amusement despite the complete absence of any actual vehicular defect brought a profound sense of shame, highlighting how his absolute faith in my integrity had been exploited merely to preserve my personal ease. Sensing my internal torment, the bishop observed with immense empathy that I had become my own jailer, a sentiment I validated by admitting the total absence of serenity in my life since that day. Placing his hand firmly upon the closed volume of scripture, he gently clarified that the primary casualty of my choice was not actually my father's faith in me, noting that I had preemptively denied my parent the opportunity to make that judgment for himself. He explained that the true devastation lay in my own self-imposed exclusion from the possibility of absolution. This realization shattered my defensive posture, offering an immense sense of liberation rather than grief, as I finally recognized that the disruption to my existence stemmed not from the original fabrication, but from my ongoing commitment to inhabit that falsehood. The path forward became clear, identifying the singular individual to whom an honest accounting was owed. The mention of my father brought an immediate reflective silence, as he was the person whose disapproval caused me the greatest anxiety. His nature was entirely devoid of cruelty or physical harshness, which paradoxically intensified the difficulty of confession. His unwavering confidence had always been a precious offering that I felt I had compromised. Rising from his seat, the bishop counseled that the time had come to set down this heavy emotional cargo, urging me to forego further hesitation in favor of immediate transparency. Despite a wave of internal apprehension, I committed to initiating the dialogue that very afternoon, receiving his supportive blessing as I departed. Stepping outside, the late-day air carried a distinct chill, while the community continued their social interactions under the trees, and children played across the lawns, offering an external calm that contrasted sharply with my own accelerating pulse. Our homeward journey seemed to drag on indefinitely as my parents discussed routine domestic matters like the evening's jam preparation and upcoming community fence repairs, while my internal focus remained entirely consumed by the urgent directive to speak before the day concluded. Upon our arrival at the farm, Mother headed indoors with the household items while Father tended to the team, leaving me momentarily frozen in the yard before gathering the resolve to approach him. When I requested a moment of his time, he readily agreed, guiding us to the tranquility of the rear grazing land, where an old oak tree provided shade for his leatherwork projects. Seated upon a weathered bench amid the rustle of the surrounding fields, he inquired about my concern, prompting me to admit my deception while avoiding his gaze. His serene confirmation that he was already aware caused me to startle in absolute astonishment, as he explained that the narrative regarding the damaged carriage had never been convincing to him. Stunned by this revelation, I questioned his long silence, to which he responded that his objective was not to force a confession, but rather to allow me the space to place my confidence in his love. This revelation surpassed the bishop's insights, dismantling the illusion of my self-preservation by showing that my father had extended quiet forbearance rather than challenging my deceit. Overwhelmed with emotion, I expressed that my silence was rooted not in fear of retribution, but in the dread of diminishing his estimation of me, to which he responded by covering my hand with his own lined palm and confirming that his perception of me had indeed altered. He clarified that he observed a child burdening herself with an inappropriate weight of remorse over a minor infraction, a sight that caused him far greater distress than the initial dishonesty. Through my continuous weeping, I recounted the numerous moments I had nearly confessed, each instance met with his calm affirmation of awareness, as he explained that a parent possesses an innate awareness of their child's disposition, having observed my fading joy, abbreviated devotions, and abrupt departures from family gatherings, recognizing the theft of my tranquility without knowing the specific cause. A quiet interlude settled over the pasture as the breeze stirred the vegetation, ending only when I softly requested his absolution. His immediate assurance that pardon had already been granted left me incredulous, yet he explained that his grace was extended the moment he perceived my internal suffering, emphasizing that true pardon is not a reward reserved for the faultless, but a necessity offered in recognition of human imperfection. Embracing him with a fervor I had not shown since my earliest years, I felt the long-standing emotional oppression begin to dissipate as we returned to our feet. Later that evening, Mother joined us on the veranda, noting with a knowing smile the length of our discussion, a sentiment Father light-heartedly concluded. Joining our circle without demanding details, she observed my countenance briefly before welcoming me back, a phrase that puzzled me until she wiped away a lingering trace of moisture from my face and noted my prolonged emotional absence. My tearful response acknowledged that my true self had indeed returned, realizing as twilight deepened that the primary injury of my deception was not the error itself or the fracturing of family bonds, but the self-imposed belief that failure alienated me from affection. Recognizing this truth transformed the remaining burdens into manageable tasks. My subsequent night's rest was entirely undisturbed for the first time in a quarter of a year, paving the way for a surprising final realization the following morning, when Father presented a token that would permanently redefine my understanding of fidelity. Awakening prior to dawn without the usual agonizing hours of insomnia, free from cyclical anxieties or the dread of exposure, I experienced an unadulterated tranquility,